messages to Russian officials, either directly through our diplomats that remain at the embassy or through a third party? Are you, clearly stating what you're saying publicly to them privately as well?
Well, I will say this: there are a number of countries around the world who have engaged the Russian Federation, including at senior levels. As you know, on our way home from Europe last week, we stopped in Paris. This week. These days are a blur. Secretary Blinken had an opportunity to meet with President Macron. A large part of that discussion was President Macron's engagement with President Putin, with France's engagement with the Russian Federation. We had a chance in Europe to meet with Foreign Minister Lapid of Israel. As you know, Prime Minister Bennett was recently in Moscow. A large portion of that meeting was dedicated to comparing notes and to hearing from our Israeli partners what they had heard in turn from the Russians. Chancellor Scholz and other Germans have engaged with the Russian Federation. President Biden today spoke to President Erdogan of Turkey. And of course, Turkey hosted today's ministerial level meeting between Foreign Minister Lavrov and Foreign Minister Kuleba. So all of these diplomatic efforts are being well coordinated with us. We have very good visibility and insight into what these efforts entail, what our allies and partners have heard or not heard, as the case might be, from the Russian Federation. And in turn, our allies and partners have a very good idea of where the United States is. And should they need to convey anything about the United States, that is at their discretion.
Okay, so there's no U.S. direct contact to Russia right now.
It, as you know, there was a meeting on the books between Secretary Blinken and Foreign Minister Lavrov a couple of weeks ago now. We determined at the time that under the present conditions, and those strategic conditions have not changed, that the time was not ripe for engagement between the United States and Russia in this regard. Yes, sir.
One last question. Has Ambassador Sullivan met with anyone in Russia, any Russian officials in recent weeks?
It's the job of an ambassador everywhere to meet with the host government. So that work continues.
You mentioned the Prime Minister visit to Moscow and so on. Are you somewhat disappointed in the sort of timid condemnation by Israel and, in fact, the absence of a position by the Palestinian Authority on the invasion of Ukraine? I mean, the Palestinians claim that, we're too little, we don't have a government, we don't have all these things, but they do have some sort of a moral weight on the issue of occupations and so on. Are you in touch with them? Have you spoken to them to whether they would issue a statement? Are you also a bit disappointed in the Israelis?
When it comes to our Israeli partners, again, a large part of the conversation that we had with Foreign Minister Lapid just a couple days ago now was focused on Ukraine. Our Israeli partners made very clear to us that they stand in stark opposition to the naked use of force, naked aggression against a sovereign state. They made that very clear in private. They've made that very clear in public. When it comes to other countries, to other entities that may have been or may be guarded or may not have made such a clear statement. Look, we've said before that now is not the time to sit on the sidelines. Now is the time for every country, every entity, every bloc, every alliance around the world to make clear whether they stand on the side of the very principles that have been at the heart of our international system over the better part of a decade, or whether those principles that they may have claimed to espouse are entirely hollow. Countries around the world need to make that clear. This is not a time for equivocation. This is not a time for ambiguity. We have been heartened by the fact that the vast majority of the world's countries have stood up, some of them in the form of a UN General Assembly vote, some of them by exercising their voice on the world stage, some of them through other forms, have stood up to clearly and starkly condemn this. And we are encouraging countries, entities, alliances, blocs around the world to do just that. Yes, sir.
Germany. I've got two questions, if I may. First, you spoke about the Kremlin lies on the chemical and biological weapon activities in Ukraine. However, there are reports about a lab in the Ukraine. I'm sure you noticed that Tucker Carlson yesterday had a big segment in this show about it, and also some.
I didn't catch it.
Sorry,
I did not catch it.
Okay. Anyway, so there are reports about a lab which is funded by the US. Could you explain what the lab is in contrast to what the Kremlin obviously says. And second, do you have any comment on the meeting between former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder and Putin right now in Moscow?
Between the former chancellor and Vladimir Putin. So to be very clear, the United States government does not own or operate biological laboratories in Ukraine, full stop. Just as we have done in countries around the world, experts have assisted Ukraine at times with laboratory safety issues. But that is the extent of the activity. Ukraine is in full compliance with the Biological Weapons Convention. It is in full compliance with the Chemical Weapons Convention. Of course, the same cannot be said of Russia. Russia has an active biological weapons program. Violation of the BWC, as I mentioned before. Russia has previously employed some of these very chemical agents against dissidents and perceived enemies of the Ukrainian government. We know that the best antidote to disinformation is information. And that gets back to some of the questions we've spoken to in this briefing already. It's part of the reason why we went on record pretty vigorously yesterday with our concerns, pushing back on the propaganda, on the disinformation that we're seeing in the first instance emanate from Russia, from Russian state media, from Russian officials. And we want to do everything we can to ensure that that disinformation isn't parroted by those who may be unwitting or who may have a different agenda. When it comes to the former German Chancellor and his engagement with President Putin, we wouldn't have a comment on the activities of a private citizen.
Knowledge of his trip?
It's not something we would typically comment on, nor is it something we would typically coordinate. It's the actions of a private citizen. Yes, Nike.
Can we switch to Asia? So South Korea elected its next president yesterday, but days into the presidential election, North Korea launched 2 missile tests on March 4th and February 26th. Is that U.S. read that those launches are aimed at influencing the presidential election of South Korea? And what's the U.S. plan to prevent further escalation of North Korea?
Well, let me first say that, and you heard this from the president last night, but we congratulate President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol on his election. The alliance between the United States and our ally in the Republic of Korea, along with our economic ties, the close friendship of our people, it is and remains the linchpin for peace, for security, for prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. We are, to your question, Nike, committed to the defense of the ROK, and we look forward to working with President-elect Yoon to deepen cooperation on key global challenges. That includes climate and includes COVID-19, deepening our economic ties, our supply chains, but also it, of course, includes deepening our cooperation on some of the security challenges that we both confront. And at the top of that list, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, is the threat that is posed by the nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs of the DPRK. I wouldn't want to speak to possible motivation of any DPRK ballistic missile launches. This is something, of course, that the DPRK has done fairly consistently over the years. In recent months, too, we've seen a spate of these launches, but whether any particular launch or series of launches had a particular motivation in mind is just not something I would speak to.
Were those ICBM launches?
These are ballistic missile launches, and we've been very clear that we condemn the ballistic missile launch. This launch, like the other launches earlier this year, it's a clear violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. It demonstrates the threat that is posed by the DPRK's illicit weapons of mass destruction program, its missile program. These are threats that really strike at peace and security within the Indo-Pacific and beyond. That is why we have stood resolutely with the international community called on the DPRK to abide by the Security Council resolutions, to refrain from further provocations, and to engage in substantive and sustained dialogue. Our commitment to our treaty allies in the Indo-Pacific, including Japan, Republic of Korea, it is ironclad. We will continue to work closely with them on the type of pragmatic, practical steps that we believe can help achieve the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. That
Can you
remains
be
our
more-
goal.
I'm sorry, can you be more specific what exactly US is going to do to prevent more launches or escalation from North Korea? What steps?
Well, as we have said previously, we will continue to hold the DPRK accountable for its flagrant violations of UN Security Council resolutions. We've imposed a number of sanctions and designations on the regime in recent weeks alone. The UN Security Council has taken up this challenge with urgency. All the while, we have continued to reach out to the DPRK. We're committed to pursuing a diplomatic approach to this challenge. We've made very clear that we have no hostile intent towards the DPRK, and we are prepared to meet with the DPRK. We have extended this offer. It is up to the DPRK to determine whether they wish to engage in this sustained diplomacy that we think can address security challenges and help achieve our ultimate objective of a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Iran.
Can you update us on what is happening? I think we had the impression last week that we were probably looking at arrival at a deal this week. And second, the former vice president told Israeli Hayom, Vice President Pence, that we will tear up any new nuclear deal with Iran. Have any comment on that?
I don't have a comment on that. I wouldn't have a comment on the remarks of a private citizen. When it comes to Iran and negotiations in Vienna, you've heard us say that there has been significant progress. We remain close to a possible deal. It's really down to a very small number of outstanding issues. But the reason these particular issues are outstanding is because they are among the most difficult ones. I'm reminded of a former president who had a sign on his desk saying, hard things are hard. These are hard issues, and they're outstanding for that reason. Now is the time for all parties to show seriousness. We continue to believe that we can and should be able to reach a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA in the coming days, but there is little time that remains because of the advancements that we've seen over the course of recent months and over the course of the past couple of years in Tehran's nuclear program.
Are you concerned that the Russians might actually spoil arrival at a deal?
Look, we are at the final stage of what has been already an 11-month negotiation. There's very little time remaining to test the proposition as to whether we can achieve a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA. We've urged all parties, and of course that includes the Russian Federation, to focus on resolving the final remaining issues so that we can achieve our shared objective. That is an Iran that is permanently and verifiably barred from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. That is not only our objective. The Russian Federation was and is a party to the P5+1. Russia was there when the JCPOA was negotiated and consummated in 2014 and 2015. It is manifestly in our interests. It is manifestly in the interests of our close European allies. It is also happens to be manifestly in the interests of the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation to see to it that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon.
When you say we were all parties, including Russia, to focus on the resolving thing, did you guys actually engage with Russia on this last demands that they tried to impose last Saturday?
So Rob Malley remains in Vienna. He has had a chance to meet with the envoys, his fellow P5+1 envoys, to continue discussions. We've made it very clear privately. We've also made it very clear in the context of the P5+1 in Vienna that the new Russia-related sanctions are wholly unrelated to the JCPOA and should not have any impact on a potential mutual return to compliance with it or its ultimate implementation. We also have no intention of offering Russia anything new or specific as it relates to the sanctions, nor is anything new required to successfully reach an agreement on a mutual return to full compliance with the JCPOA. Francisco.
These Russian new demands, one of the main roadblocks to achieving an understanding. Do you include that in the very small number of outstanding issues?
There are a small number of issues. I will let the Russian Federation speak to what it is that they are seeking. But I will just say we urge all parties, including Russia, to focus on resolving this very small set of issues to determine whether or not we can achieve a mutual return to compliance. Yep.
Very quickly, last week there was, witnessed a spike in deadly assaults by the Israeli army on Palestinian youth mainly. A number of them died, maybe half a dozen. And the British Consul General came out and expressed her concern and called on the Israelis for restraint and so on. Do we expect, like Ambassador Knight, to say something similar or to caution the Israelis against such a spike or such use of deadly force?
You've heard from any number of individuals in this administration, including from Ambassador Knights, that we believe it's critical for Israel and the Palestinian Authority to refrain from unilateral steps that exacerbate tensions, that undercut efforts to advance what remains our desired outcome. That is a two-state solution. That certainly includes this violence of all types. Thank you all very much.
Possible at all? Are you expecting any further outreach with the Venezuelans?
I'm sorry, any further
Outreach.
Well, first on Venezuela, let me first reiterate what has been the big news, and that is that and welcome news, and that is that we gladly welcome the return of U.S. citizens Gustavo Cardenas and Jorge Alberto Fernandez from Venezuela. Their release would not have been possible without the tireless efforts of individuals in this building and throughout this administration. Of course, those efforts were led by Special Envoy Carstens, our Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs. Even as we celebrate the return of these two Americans, we are going to continue working every day to bring home every U.S. national held hostage or wrongfully detained in the world, including those who remain to this day wrongfully detained in Venezuela. We've said this before. We've said this in unison with our allies and partners around the world, that the practice of wrongfully detaining third country nationals represents a threat to the safety and security of everyone traveling, working, living abroad. We oppose this practice anywhere. We oppose this practice everywhere. So one of the purposes of this visit was to ensure the health and well-being of U.S. nationals detained by the regime in Venezuela and to press for their release. Of course, we were able to welcome home two of them, but certainly the delegation sought to ensure the health and well-being of all those detained. We also noted Maduro's statement that he is willing to return to negotiations with the opposition's unitary platform, which we believe to be an important and a positive step. We continue to believe that Venezuelan-led comprehensive negotiations, they represent the best mechanism available to restore Venezuelan democracy and the rule of law. And that's why we support the unitary platform's goal of immediately resuming negotiations with the Maduro regime to restore free and fair elections, democratic institutions, and the rule of law, as well as respect for human rights in Venezuela. The other big element of the delegation, the other element that they pressed, was the need to make progress on the democratic aspirations of the people of Venezuela. We will continue to press that case. We will continue to do everything we can with Juan Guaido on the unitary platform, but also through other channels to support the democratic aspirations of the Venezuelan people. Thank you all. There's been no change. We recognize Juan Guaido as the interim president. Thank you.
All right, guys, you already see what it is. This is Grippy Rob, the political pothead, aka Canada's convict. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the stream, folks, and I'll be back at 4:30 for the 5. All right, I'll be back at 4:30 for the 5. Hope you have a great day. Peace.